Welcome to this first set of PowerPoint slides devoted to the topic of interpersonal attraction and intimacy. In this section of the course, we're going to talk about the whole range of human relationships. We're going to talk about friendships and political alliances, but most of the time, we're going to be talking about heterosexual romantic attraction. I understand that this is not everybody's situation in life, but it's the area that most of the research has been done on, and therefore it's the area that I have the most information to tell you about. Having said this, it seems as though it does generalize pretty well to most people. Gay men, for example, are still men, and they seem to express the same kinds of preferences in mates that heterosexual men do. Physical things set aside, and we'll get back to that later. Lesbian women, on the other hand, are still women and share a lot of the same mate preferences with heterosexual women. But having said that, we are going to spend most of our time talking about heterosexual romantic attraction. A theoretical perspective that we're going to find very useful as we talk about interpersonal attraction is something known as social exchange theory. Social exchange theory is a very general theory used in social psychology to explain a lot of different types of social behaviors, but it has also been applied to the study of relationships. But basically, our relationships with other people are very much thought of in marketing terms. Do our costs outweigh our benefits, or the other way around? So, in our relationships, whether we're talking about romantic relationships or friendships, according to social exchange theory, we're constantly weighing what our costs are and what benefits we're getting out of it. Are we getting a good deal? And when social exchange theory is applied to the study of relationships, it's referred to as the reward theory of attraction. So when you're reading your textbook, you won't see social exchange theory very much, but your textbook does refer to the reward theory of attraction, and we're essentially talking about the same thing. By way of example, consider the romantic couple that you see on this slide. Now, if I were to ask you, if we were together in class, to tell me something about the man based just on what you see in the picture, most of you would probably jump to the conclusion that you see written right there next to his picture. The guy's got money and she's a gold digger, and most of you will be pretty comfortable making that kind of assumption. Now, some of you would try to be very polite and say things like, well, maybe he has a really nice personality, or maybe he's a celebrity of some sort, even though he doesn't have a lot of money. But the point is that you automatically understand that in order for these two people to be involved in a relationship, they each have to be getting a fair deal. Now, it's obvious what he's getting out of this. He's got a young, attractive wife, but from her perspective, it isn't obvious on the surface what she's getting out of it, and therefore we search for some explanation, but we assume that this guy has something to offer for this relationship to have happened at all. That's what social exchange theory is all about. That's what the reward theory of attraction is all about. We will eventually get around to talking about the reason why the physical attractiveness of the woman seems to carry special weight in these kinds of situations, more so than that of the man. But in fact, there's a long history of research showing that attractive women and successful men are likely to be paired up. All you have to do is look at who these partners are to some high status men, no matter what field they're in, professional athletes, movie stars, whatever they may be. When you examine the marriages, there was a study where women had their physical attractiveness rated when they were in high school as part of a study. And years later, they tracked down these same women to find out what had happened to them later in life and whether they'd gotten married. And there was a very strong correlation between how attractive the girl was judged to be in high school and how high in status the man was that she ended up marrying. In fact, another study indicated that the very best predictor of a man's socioeconomic status, you can load all of the variables you can think of into the regression equation, but the one that comes out as the best predictor of a man's socioeconomic status is the physical attractiveness of his wife. At the University of Michigan, a study was done where women were given a questionnaire about their dating preferences, and once again there was a significant relationship between how attractive the girl was and the occupation that a potential date or partner would have in order for her to be satisfied. So in a nutshell, that's how social exchange theory works. There have been many different varieties of social exchange theory applied to the study of relationships. One of the earliest was by a guy named George Homans, who took a very simple approach to this. Basically, Homans said that we will only stay in a relationship as long as the rewards outweigh the costs. So if you're in a friendship, if you're in a marriage, whatever the relationship is, you're constantly calculating how much am I putting into this versus how much am I getting out of it. And for Homans, as long as the rewards outweigh the costs, you stay. However, a simple theory like this simply can't explain a lot of things we know. For example, people will often stay in relationships that clearly are unsatisfying to them and that are not delivering the rewards that they need, but yet they stay. So, for example, imagine a woman who's engaged in an abusive marriage. She's got this husband who's cruel to her, he physically abuses her. She stays, though, no matter how miserable her life seems to be. And Homans' theory simply can't explain that very well. So for that, we have to turn to other kinds of social exchange theories. A popular alternative to the Homans social exchange theory was proposed by two researchers named Tybo and Kelly in 1959. Like Homans, Tybo and Kelly believe that we form relationships with other people based on whether our rewards outweigh the costs. And according to them, we look at something called the comparison level. Based on our past experience and the expectations for what we want in the future, we have a certain level of satisfaction that we need to have met for us to get involved in a relationship. And that's what the comparison level is all about. If our comparison level is met, then we are willing to at least tentatively commit to a relationship with a new partner. However, whether we stay in the relationship or not depends on our comparison level for alternatives. So if you're in an unsatisfactory marriage, for example, even though you're unhappy and your costs are outweighing your rewards, when you look around outside of the relationship, your perception may be that, as bad as things are right now, they will be even worse if you leave. And so your comparison level for alternatives is very low. You're not going to have better satisfaction outside. So a more nuanced theory like this can explain situations in which people may stay in unsatisfactory relationships. And so, given this desire for a reward, people are always working at exchanging resources to maximize the rewards, and therefore we can think of our web of personal relationships as sort of a large marketplace where we're exchanging resources with others and hopefully getting a fair shake in the process. There's an interesting video attached to the module for this course. You can see it on the webpage. And it demonstrates how people with a certain value shop for others who have sort of an equivalent value. And there have been several interesting experiments in social psychology to demonstrate this. Part of the problem with figuring out your market value is that it seems like our own assessment of what our market value is can change depending upon the experiences that we have. First, let me describe a study that was done at Yale University. The subjects in this experiment were first-year men studying at Yale, and they were in an experiment where they thought they were taking a test that was going to predict how well they would do at Yale. And so they're sitting there taking the test, and about halfway through the test, they took a break, and the researchers scanned through person's answers for the first half of the test and gave them one of two kinds of feedback. In the positive feedback condition, the man was told, "Wow, you're doing really well on this. As a matter of fact, if you continue doing this well in the second half of the test, you're going to end up in the top 10% of people who've ever graduated from Yale." In the negative feedback condition, they were told, "Well, it's not going so well right now, and if you keep doing this for the second half of the test, you're going to end up in the bottom 10% of people who have ever taken this test." So the guy was made to feel good about himself or bad about himself, depending upon the condition he was in. So while they took this break, they went to a snack bar that was nearby, and they walked in, and there was a young woman there who just happened to be acquainted with the experimenter. So they sat down with her, and he made introductions, the experimenter did. But then the experimenter had to leave, and he left the two alone. Now, this was the same woman in all conditions. The only difference was in half of the conditions she was made up to be quite attractive, and in the other conditions, the other condition made up to be much less attractive. There are lots of ways they do this. They put on ugly wigs and unfashionable, badly fitting clothes, and they do a bad makeup job, or the opposite. So it was the same woman in all conditions, and the woman was blind as to what the man had just been through. In other words, she did not know if he had just heard good things or bad things about himself, so she could not change her behavior. And what they were interested in was, after this encounter, would the man's recent experience with the test have any bearing on which woman he was more likely to approach? And it turns out it did. The guys who had been given the positive feedback, who were feeling pretty good about themselves, were much more likely to try to contact this girl in the future and to maintain some kind of relationship with her, the attractive woman. On the other hand, the guys who had gotten the bad information about themselves were much more likely to approach the less attractive woman to try to form some kind of relationship with her. Now, the guys were randomly assigned to conditions, so it's not like they had all the high desirable guys in one group and low desirable guys in the other group. It was a perfect mix, and apparently the variable had quite an effect. A similar experiment using women as subjects was done at Stanford University, where the women who were the subjects were either Stanford undergraduates or women from a nearby community college. And they were in a psychologist's office where they were about to get some feedback on a personality test they'd taken. While they were waiting to see the psychologist, a smooth, well-dressed graduate student came in and introduced himself and said that he had just graduated from Harvard and that he was starting graduate school at Stanford, and he didn't know anybody in town. And so he was making a conversation with this young woman, and he was chosen for this role because he was good at it. And he got around finally to asking her on a date. Would she be willing to go into San Francisco that weekend and have dinner, go to see a movie? There were 37 women in the experiment. 32 of them immediately accepted his offer, even though it was just a few days away, and even though many of them must have had some plans. But anyway, right after this happened, she was called into the psychologist's office, and as in the previous experiment, was given either positive or negative feedback. In the positive condition, she was told all kinds of good things about her personality. The test indicated that she was intelligent and stable and well-adjusted and probably had a lot of friends. In the negative condition, she was told things that were just the opposite, that she was kind of selfish and needy, and she had this veneer of being well-adjusted, but she was really kind of neurotic. And so she got this negative feedback. And then she was asked by the psychologist, "Oh, I see you were just talking to one of our new graduate students out there. We haven't had a chance to really meet him much yet. What do you think of him?" Well, I'll spare you the details about how the evaluation was done, but needless to say, the women who had the low self-esteem manipulation, who'd gotten negative feedback, were much more enthusiastic and positive about the guy than the other women were. And again, this was a random assignment study. Now, as I talked about this, you may have realized some of the ethical problems with studies like this. You're giving people all kinds of bad feedback about themselves, and so you can't just release them back out into the world. You have to let them know what you did and why, and reassure them that the whole thing was bogus, that the tests they were taking weren't real. But on the other hand, think of the other people. Supposing you were in the positive feedback conditions and were just told you were doing great on a test or that you had a wonderful personality. Now they're telling you, well, we just made that up. So that's not very pleasant either. And by the way, for the women, you won't be going out on a date with this guy this weekend. But these are examples of some early studies done to show how a person's own sense of their market value influences the type of people that they would be likely to try to form a relationship with. So what are the things that increase a person's market value? What are the things that others will be looking for in you to evaluate whether you're a high quality mate or not? Now, there are some things that both males and females seem to value equally. For long-term mates, character traits become much more important than physical attractiveness, and this is true for both men and for women. We also like fidelity and loyalty in our partners, whether you're a male or a female, albeit for somewhat different reasons. And we also look for indicators of health, especially things that are called symmetry and normativity. In another set of PowerPoint slides where I talk about physical attractiveness, we're going to talk about the importance of symmetry and normativity. But for now, just understand that we do seek indicators of health in our potential partners. The topic of sex differences in mate preferences has been fairly controversial. A lot of researchers don't like the idea that we're talking about a preference that's sort of wired in, that men, no matter where they're from, prefer the same things, and women, no matter where they're from, prefer the same things. And there's been a lot of back and forth in the scientific literature about this. Most of the proponents of this point of view come from the evolutionary psychology perspective that you'll be reading about in this chapter. But the most recent and by far the most comprehensive study on this topic was published literally just this month. In the spring of 2020, as I'm making this recording, there was a large-scale replication of approximately 15,000 people in over 45 countries looking at sex differences in mate preferences, and they tend to replicate the things that has been found in previous studies. So let me talk about what some of these differences are. Here are a list of things that females place more weight on than males do, things that they find attractive in potential male partners. First of all, economic resources or good financial prospects. One of the most readily replicated findings is that females more than males care about the economic status of their partners. And whether we're talking about current economic status or the potential for future economic status, in either case it matters. Social status in general matters more to females than males. Females also prefer partners that are somewhat older than them. They value things like ambition and industriousness that would be indicators of perhaps good economic prospects down the line. They also like dependability and stability. An unpredictable, sort of erratic man is not considered very attractive. And yes, women do tend to admire athletic prowess. They like men who are tall. They look for signs of love and commitment. They are also interested in the willingness to invest in children. Pictures of men interacting with children or playing with children make the man be evaluated more favorably and as being more attractive than pictures where men are not interacting with children. The same does not hold true for women. Whether they're dealing with children or not, the attractiveness of the woman doesn't change. And yes, women do like physically attractive men, and we'll eventually get around to talking about the specifics of what that means. For males, there's really only one thing that men value a lot more than women do, and that's physical beauty. Yes, women like physically attractive men, but men are obsessed with physical beauty in women. And what this really is an attraction to youth and health, because the components of physical attractiveness for women are things that would indicate that a woman is young, of a certain age, and that she's in good health. So a symmetrical face, clear skin and eyes, thick lustrous hair, full lips, long legs, good muscle tone, high energy level, immature facial features, and a waist to hip ratio of approximately 0.70, meaning that the hips or the waist is about 70% as wide as the hips are. We're going to talk about these in much more detail in a later set of PowerPoint slides. But when it comes to mate preferences, men are less discriminating than women, except on this one thing. They like younger partners and more attractive partners.